advocacy. My whole
Right.
thing is speaking out, doing the action, and joining people from all over the world.
Yeah.
We actually create local change and global dialogue.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Conversations with MM. Hope you're doing well today. It's getting to feel warm finally here in New York, and today we are honored to have a very wonderful guest, an important person who has been dedicating his life to social justice. I'm talking about an educator, a writer, and he is currently the president of the James and Grace Lee Boggs Foundation. His name is Scott Kurashige. Did I say that well, Scott? He's an author, and his latest book is American Peril: The Violent History of Anti-Asian Racism here in the U.S. And without further ado, I'd like to welcome Scott. Hello, Scott. Good afternoon.
Hi, it's morning here, but thank you so much for
It's
having
morning.
me.
Morning in Seattle. Yeah, here it's 1:37 in New York. Thank you for joining me. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you.
In
I'm
this
looking forward to this
podcast.
conversation.
Yes, thank you. And tell me a little bit of your background, Scott, before we go into a deep dive of your book, which I read had been so tough, difficult to read, and really a substantial one.
Yeah, I mean, this book really draws from my whole career doing both community organizing, activist work, and scholarship and teaching. I was very influenced when I was a college student by
Yeah.
the film Who Killed Vincent Chin. Learning the story of Vincent Chin was very shocking to me. One, because I, of course, had experienced different types of racism, discrimination, but I had never seen that story connected, and so powerfully told. The film,
Nice.
award-winning, Academy Award nominated film by Renee Tajima Pena and Christine Choi, really brought, I think, my own experiences of racism and discrimination to the screen in a way that connected the stories of many other people. And of course, to see how tragically Vincent Chin was killed. And the other side of it was because there was no real justice for him or his family in court. There was such a powerful movement of Asian Americans and a
Yes.
multiracial civil rights movement. So that, I think, even had a bigger effect on me because, we all know there's different types of racism and racist attacks that exist. But to see the power of hundreds of thousands of people coming together, I think in so many ways that inspired me to want to be an activist. And so, yeah, that was around 1988, 89 when that film came out and I first saw it. And in many ways, I've been working on this book ever since then.
I see.
But along the way, I've also written about Asian American history, about African American history. So much of my work is about the intersection of Black and Asian histories, but also more broadly about U.S. history and putting the U.S. into a global transnational context where, of course, we need to study so many different groups in this country. Native Americans, of course, the first, indigenous inhabitants of this land here, but also Latino, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans. So that's really how I approach U.S. history and American studies, is to bring all these voices that have been historically excluded to the center of the frame.
Just I believe in what you're doing, and which is necessary. So at the time when you saw the documentary, were you like a teenager or student at the time, or were you already out of school? And
Yeah, I
already
think I was a
into the labor force?
sophomore in college at the time.
I see.
And
So
so
that
it
really
was,
impacted you.
yeah, I was too young. Vincent Chin was killed in 1982, so I was still probably in middle school when that happened. I had no awareness of activism at that time.
Yes,
But
you were like a teenager.
watching the film and seeing how there were still ongoing issues like that is what really got me motivated. And that got me actually, to study more of my own family history,
Right.
because on my paternal side, I'm a fourth generation Japanese American.
Mm-hmm.
My great grandfather, as I learned as I was starting to study more history, he
Mm-hmm.
was actually a sugar plantation contract laborer. He went from Yamaguchi Prefecture in Japan. He had some economic hardship, and he went looking to try to, make a better life for himself
Mm-hmm.
and send some money back home. And he had a real, was just incredibly arduous labor to have to work on these sugar plantations. The
Which
early
state is it? Where was he?
This was the Big Island of Hawaii, and the early
Oh.
Japanese immigrants, like my great grandfather, they didn't come to the United States. They went to the Kingdom of Hawaii. It was
Mm-hmm.
still under Native Hawaiian sovereign rule when they were going. But of course, it was largely haole or the white plantation owners
Mm-hmm.
that were able to grab so much of the land, control so much of the sugar industry, and they imposed just very onerous conditions. So, uh, my great grandfather was one of the early sugar plantation workers that tried to get away as soon as possible. Some people finished their contracts, some people ran away.
So
But
where did he go?
he
He
eventually
went back
became
to
a
Japan.
coffee farmer. No, he became a coffee farmer in Kona on the Big Island.
Oh,
So,
oh, oh, okay.
some of the world's greatest coffee comes from the
Kona
Big
coffee.
Island of
Oh, I can
Hawaii.
imagine the smell.
Yeah, my great grandfather and some of my other ancestors were part of setting up some of the early coffee farms, particularly the earliest Japanese immigrant coffee farms.
So did he even become like a other than being a laborer? Did he graduate into being a small plantation farmer owner?
They mostly were renting land, but it was his son, my grandfather,
Mm.
that he never went to college, but he was very studious. He worked at a bank, and he really helped a number of the immigrant farmers in the area, or eventually the second generation farmers in
Mm.
the area, to buy smaller plots of land, and really to sustain the coffee industry in Kona, which
It's
is now again
interesting.
one of the world's most famous.
Right.
So that was my father's side, and my mother's side is more from the West Coast. They came later, and because they were not in Hawaii, they were on the West Coast. They were all put in Japanese American concentration camps during World War II. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, my grandfather, who was a Buddhist minister,
Mm.
he was taken by the FBI and separated from my mom's family.
Oh.
And I always talk about, my mom was only, 6 years old at the time Pearl Harbor was attacked. But
Oh.
her youngest brother, he wasn't even born until 2 days after the Pearl Harbor attack.
Oh
So
my God.
imagine a
Oh.
baby born 2 days after Pearl Harbor being declared a threat to national security by the government and being
That could be
forced.
another, a book or a movie, in fact, if you could
Yeah. And
produce.
of course, my family story is replicated thousands of times when we
Right.
talk about
You
what
know
happened
what?
during
Well,
World War
as
II.
you're talking about your ancestry, your great grandfather, we have a lot of similarities. Like the Filipinos came to Hawaii as well, and became sugar plant workers, and asparagus. My great grandfather from the island of Siquijor, when America was the new colonizer of the Philippines, they all went there too, like on the slow steamships or that, and so they came as workers, and so
Mm.
that was how my mom told me about my great grandfather, who had to leave his family. My grandmother at that time was like 2 years old, I think. He had to leave and to support, because that was the trend. We were all coming to America, sort of, by the turn of the century. So it's amazing. Our histories are really, really intertwined. And who knows? Your great grandfather knows my great grandfather too.
Yeah, and it's not coincidental. I mean, the sugar plantations, they were very oppressive. And
Yes.
so, Native Hawaiians, they did not want to, work for these plantation owners.
Right.
There was Chinese exclusion. So then once Hawaii becomes U.S. territory, it's not easy to bring Chinese workers. So then
Right.
they're bringing in Japanese immigrant workers, but people are going on strike. People are resisting.
Because
And
of
so
the
part of the strategy of the plantation owners, including using violence and whipping and discipline, was they brought in Korean workers, they brought in Filipino workers. They wanted to pit the
Each
different
other, yeah.
ethnic groups against each other, so they wouldn't be able to form one union or come and strike. And
That's
as I document, in the book,
yeah.
there was one of the biggest massacres in definitely labor history in Hawaii occurred
Mm-hmm.
in 1924. The
Mm-hmm.
police opened fire on sugar plantation workers who were on strike, mostly Filipinos, on the
Mm-hmm.
island of Kauai in the town of Hanapepe. And there were 16 Filipino workers who were killed in this. It's very much, not even killed, it's a massacre. And so many people like me, even in Asian American studies, didn't learn about this until quite recently.
I
In
only know
part,
from you now.
yeah, in part because, as I've learned from some of my colleagues who've researched this, the workers who were killed were very quickly buried in unmarked graves and covered up. And it was only 2019, so just recently, that they've even been able to document that
That's so sad.
these people were buried.
You have dedicated your life so much into research and writing, and this is a brave and courageous undertaking, or maybe like we should call that your calling. And how long did you write the book, research and writing?
Yeah, so definitely some of it goes back to, like I was saying, 1989, 1990.
Oh, like it's a compilation of past
in
years. Yeah.
Philadelphia, I visited Philadelphia while there was a trial still going on involving Asian Americans who got into a conflict with some basically white supremacists in Philadelphia. And that was in the early to mid 1990s. So in some ways, it's over 30 years. And I finished other books, in the interim period. And I always knew this was an important topic. And so
Yes.
my sense of how important the topic is never changed. But of course, during the pandemic, there were so many anti-Asian hate incidents,
Yes.
and they finally got on the news. And even Asian Americans were becoming much more interested in studying our own histories.
Right.
And that really convinced me. I was getting requests to do media interviews and speaking engagements. And so that was really about 5 years ago that I determined that I really needed to finish this book, particularly after the Atlanta massacres,
Yes.
the Atlanta spa shootings, really alarmed so many people, but galvanized many Asian Americans and our allies to go on, protests, demonstrations, hold teach-ins. And I think that was an important wake-up moment. Sadly, I don't know if the mainstream media is still paying attention, but we can't wait for that to happen.
Yeah.
It's very important that we have our own,
for it.
like you're doing, to have our own independent media.
Right. I was reading your book, and it took me a while because like it's in between my schedules, and I was reading it, and I was very I particularly was aware of the Chinese Exclusion Act, which was a very damning kind of landmark legislation as far as the U.S. is concerned, because it's an act of racism. And I could not see, if maybe I just missed it, that the Chinese were here also because of the immigration treaty between the U.S. and China, that they needed Chinese labor because of the construction of the railroad that met the East and West, and in fact was very much the reason for America's industrialization. So was it there? Maybe I just missed it.
Yeah, there is a section where I talk about Chinese workers on the Transcontinental Railroad, particularly the Central Pacific Railroad. And again,
Yes.
they would not have been able to do this without all that labor. And certainly they would not have made so much money if they had not
Right. Oh my
been
God.
able to use 10,000 Chinese immigrant workers. It was mostly Irish immigrant workers and Irish American workers coming from the East Coast, but they were white and they had longer histories here, and they were pushing, to get better wages and working conditions. But of course, it wasn't as easy to get European immigrant workers or white American workers on the West Coast, because the West Coast was, before the Panama Canal and before, modern shipping and transport, it just wasn't. That's why the transcontinental was so important to connecting. So there was much more of an effort to bring in workers from China. And if people learn one tiny thing about Asian American history in high school, it's that the Chinese built the railroads.
Yeah.
And of course, it's important that we have these contributions reflected in our textbooks, but it's also important that we go beyond just that surface level recognition of contribution, because it wasn't simply a fact that, everybody in America wanted to honor Chinese Americans. I mean, Chinese Americans, the railroads, they built the railroads, but the railroads weren't for them. They didn't even get free passage back to their homes in California when the railroad was connected in Utah.
Yeah.
And so, it's a story of wanting their labor, but not respecting their full right to live and, be citizens of this country. There was a ban on Asian immigrants becoming citizens well until the 1940s, 1950s.
That's why there's even this popular saying, like, go back to China.
Yeah, definitely. And why they were called coolies and other types of stereotypes. And so really it's in that context that so much of the violence against Chinese immigrants and later other Asian immigrants occurred. It's that their labor was absolutely essential to developing the mining industry, the railroad industry, agriculture, all the way up through not just Chinese, Japanese immigrants, Indian immigrants, Korean immigrants, Filipino immigrants. But
built USA.
At the same time, there was no recognition of their right to be citizens, right? They were considered disposable workers. Do the labor, and then we want to get rid of you. And so it is really in that context, because they did not have the right to vote, because they didn't have political representation, because they didn't have civil rights, that they were so vulnerable to attack when you have particularly these white mobs trying to drive all Chinese or other Asian groups out of a town, which happened on around 200 occasions. You have entire Chinese or other Asian communities being completely uprooted, either by violence or the threat of violence. And of course, you have laws that, for instance, said, if you were a Chinese immigrant or if you're a Native American or Black in California, you could never testify against a white person in court. So imagine a white person can simply literally get away with murder.
It's unfair
at times because
it makes you angry. Reading your book made me angry when the court cases you have featured, because it's really this is real outright injustice. And it's like you do not have a chance at that time.
Yeah. And of course, as we know with the story of the Philippines, it doesn't start in the continental US. It oftentimes starts with the US going overseas to expand its political, economic, military influence, starting wars of aggression, slaughtering thousands of people. I didn't really even know about the Budaho massacre until really close. I didn't have a detailed account of it until I was finishing this book, and I saw this other book came out called Massacre in the Clouds, and oh my gosh, it's like 1,000 people in the Philippines massacred in one incident by the U.S. military. The U.S. military says first it's a battle, it's a war, these are war heroes, but no, it's massacre of children, of women, of elders, of some men who are actually trying to surrender. They did not want to fight when they were so outgunned, and yet you can have 1,000 people killed and it gets almost completely, covered up, erased from history. Even Asian American history classes, when I was TAing for Asian American history in graduate school, at UCLA, we didn't discuss this incident.
Interestingly, in the Philippines, the worst militarization happened when the Americans came. They were much more high-powered compared to to Spain. But, they just brought us through the Treaty of Paris, and that's why they became our new colonizer. But there were Filipinos who fought against it. In fact, my great-grandfather was a very prominent guerrilla leader who fought in Cebu. And there's a street name given to his name in honor of that. And what happened is this massacres, this martial law, the first thing that happened was in Cebu, where I was born. There's none of this in our schools. Like the gap, okay, we won against Spain. And then after that, we don't know what happened. And then it's like zip, and you're a young kid, you wouldn't know. So the next The next history class of ours will be like the American influence, but the transition, which was so bloody and very gross and all that, no, that's even a very tame word to say to use. But only when I became an adult that I did all my research too and found out that my great grandfather was a guerrilla fighter, and it's like, yes, I feel honored.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I mean, the American politicians called it, the most humanitarian war that's ever been fought. I mean, these
yeah,
ridiculous
benevolent assimilation.
ridiculous lies. The historian Stuart Creighton Miller called it the triumph of American innocence. The dawn of the U.S. becoming a global power and empire is intertwined with this idea that the U.S. is benevolent, that it's an
Wow, it
exceptionalist,
gives you your democracy.
shining city on a hill. And I think, again, that goes hand in hand, that for the U.S. to become a global power, it had to wage war. It had to take colonies, against the will
Yes, it's the strategy.
of indigenous people, against the will of people in Asia. And so the wars against Asia were essential. Sadly, all the killing, the murder was deemed essential to these conquests. And yet, because the U.S. wanted to create this myth of innocence, of benevolence, it also had to erase all these stories of the violence and the massacre and make it sound like manifest destiny was just this natural process that God intended, for
They're being
Americans, particularly white Americans. But there are also great stories, of some U.S. Military, African Americans in particular. There were some very interesting cases of where they switched sides and they fought with the Filipino guerrillas, for their independence. David Fagan was one of the most renowned in the Philippines, but also one of the most reviled in the U.S. because he was considered a traitor.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So in your experience, like, how do you translate this into your class? Do you discuss these things with your students? Do you have a special way of talking about this in the US?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me and for I think a lot of Asian American students, this history is so important, but we don't even know that we're looking for it until we find it.
Yes.
And so, I think for a lot of people, even more, children of recent immigrants and refugees, their parents oftentimes try to protect them from these stories of trauma, of
You would be
pain.
scared, yeah.
So many Southeast Asians, had to survive genocide and war and being in refugee camps and trying to escape under deadly circumstances. And so family history, whether, again, you're fourth or fifth or eighth generation, or whether you are yourself an immigrant or refugee, family history is, I think, an important way to connect the personal stories and the personal interests to the broader social, political, global history. I think that's one way. But of course, Asian American history is important for people who are not Asian as well. I mean, this is so influential. Of course, we just talked about the colonization of the Philippines, Spanish-American War, the U.S. becoming a global power. Most people, of course, know the U.S. is the world superpower, but we don't even have a sense of how it became.
How it happened.
How it became here, because so much of these wars of conquest have just been covered up, erased from the history books. And even when we study the Pacific War, World War II, or the Vietnam War, it's always told from a very limited perspective, war heroes, or even in writing this book, I didn't even know that much about the dropping of the atomic bomb. Of course, it was unprecedented, still unprecedented in history. The U.S. is the only country to ever use atomic bombs. You have these movies like Oppenheimer that show now how the bomb was made.
Was created, yeah.
I did not even realize until pretty recently when I was researching this book that President Harry Truman, his first radio address about dropping the bomb on Hiroshima, he said, the bomb was dropped on an important Japanese army base. So again, erasing the fact that it was a city. It was tens of thousands of civilians, children, who were killed. Instead, making it sound like it was an attack on a military target, when in fact, we know what it was. It was to force Japan to surrender by showing how many people can be annihilated. And even Truman himself in his diary said, I feel bad about having to kill a whole population like that.
Right.
So we hear Trump saying, I may have to wipe out a whole civilization in Iran, or even now he said Oman. If Oman goes along with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, he's going to wipe out that country. But, you know, Trump obviously is very unconventional in the way he speaks. But the underlying sentiment that if you want to win these wars of conquest, if you want to, you know, be the world's dominant power, if you want to have nuclear weapons at one time that nobody else had, you need to be willing to engage in these acts of, frankly, annihilation. And so the book really is about, it is about the violence that occurs, but it's also about how that violence gets erased, it gets sanitized, it gets told in a very one-sided way. And, you know, if you're Asian American, it's on the one hand, there's this desire to want to be accepted as fully American, to assimilate, you know, to be like, you know, the majority, the dominant culture. On the other hand, we know from personal experience that that's not how we've been treated historically. And so we have to see the full history. We have to see we have to uncover some of these very painful moments that a lot of people in power would rather not remember.
But, you know, without the knowledge of history, Asians or anyone would love to be part of the big pot, like just be American, be like, unfortunately, like be white as well, something like that. Unless they know history, then we become like, we have a good anchor in ourselves.
Yeah, and that's,
so your book is helpful.
Carlos Buloson's famous book, America's in the Heart, really starts with this idea that the U.S. portrays itself as liberators of the Philippines, tells all these stories about freedom and democracy, and yet when the narrator, it's based on his life, but Carlos Buloson is not the actual, you know, narrator of the story. It's a novel, of course, encounters a very, very different experience, but also encounters another side of American culture that he perhaps wasn't expecting. The labor organizing, you know, the radical organizing, the Popular Front movement, the fight against fascism.
That's the salvation of it.
Yeah, there are different ways. There are different ways we could think about, you know, belonging and inclusion than the dominant story.
Right. I just really would like to harp on the truth, because without that, it's not going to be good for us and for everyone. So your book mentions the solidarity, which for me is the great takeaway. Like, we need to be united and understand what's this about and how we can move forward. So what are the practical activities that you have done in terms of reaching out? So you can encourage the others to do that too.
I mean, so much of our culture is designed to keep us divided, to keep us ignorant of our own histories, let alone other people's histories, or to stereotype other people. You know, we live in a capitalist society where, you know, wages are determined, profits are determined based upon competition. And so, you know, solidarity really works against some of these dominant cultural tendencies to try to pit us against each other. So education obviously is one, you know, building community is so important too. And so much of the way solidarity is built is one, through recognizing that there are shared forms of discrimination, injustice, oppression. They're not always exactly the same. Certainly for Asian immigrants, our stories are never going to be the same as Native American, indigenous peoples, or, you know, African Americans whose ancestors were brought here in chains. But we can understand how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. I think that's one, the multiracial coalition building solidarity. I think the second one, we've been alluding to this, is there has to be a sense of global solidarity. When we're talking about the US, we cannot limit our story to what happens, you know, within the continental 48 states. It has to be about the US is a history of empire. And that's so important. As the Pulitzer Prize winning author Viet Thanh Nguyen said, the biggest acts of anti-Asian violence actually occur in wars, in the Philippines, in Cambodia, in Vietnam, now in Iran, in Palestine. And so that's important too, that we have that sense of global solidarity. And I think it's also important that we recognize, solidarity is created through organizing, through movement building, through movements that don't just protest, but offer a different vision of how we can live together. Not just offer, but create actual ways. I mean, that's what, for instance, the civil rights movement was so much about. When the Montgomery bus boycott was happening, the Black community, through churches, through social groups, through women's groups, they built alternative ways to transport people to work, to feed each other, to get your groceries, through arts, through culture. And that's so important. And there are even stories of Asian Americans who went down to the South. Again, these are not recorded in most textbooks, but there are Asian Americans who went down to the South to participate in the civil rights movement. Of course, we know there are whites who were part of that. There are whites who were killed fighting for the civil rights movement. But there are also Asian Americans who are part of that. And even more so in New York, where you are, on the West Coast, where I am, there were so many important coalitions that made developments like Asian American studies possible, or made, Japanese American redress, the government apologizing for, incarceration during World War II. These things would not have been possible if there weren't coalition partners supporting Asian American civil rights movements.
Yes. So to wrap up, 30 minutes just passed, Scott, imagine. Do you have a book tour for this? Are you moving around the country?
Yeah, I've been able to go to quite a number of places. And it's just been wonderful because, while there are some universities that now have Asian American studies programs and classes, I've been lucky to go to some of those. It's also been so delightful to go to bookstores, to go to community organizations, to go to public libraries and have people come up. They might work in IT, they might work, in the service industries, and they're really excited to have an opportunity to learn about histories, to learn about issues and movements that they never had a chance to take classes on in their own education. So that's been one of the really nice, I think, one of the nice aspects of going on tour is just meeting people one-on-one. As I was mentioning, 5 years ago, the mainstream suddenly was covering Asian American stories, during the pandemic, like I had never seen before. But as we know, watching what's happening with the media today, what's popular one month can be,
could be
sort of
forgotten.
off screen, forgotten by the next. And so it's much more important that, again, I've been able to have these community events and meet people and just, I've had over 1,000 people come to my event so far. And a lot of them are buying the book too. And if they can't buy the book, that's okay. They could ask their library to stock it and they could borrow the book.
That's a result of the word you said, like solidarity. Like people learn, like eventually they will come together. So it's still, the struggle continues, and we really have to sustain it.
Thank you
so much, Scott, for your time. And you inspire me today, and hope you continue doing your great work.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing these stories with your audience.
Wonderful. Yes, of course. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed our vibrant exchange today, and listen and build solidarity and seek the truth out and unite with the other people in our community. Bye for now.
You can find the book American Peril on bookshop.org. You can find it from an independent bookseller at bookshop.org.
Bookshop. Okay. And it's also on Amazon. I saw it. And the UC Press.
Yes, it is. But Amazon has, for some reason, not been discounting the book at all. So there's no reason you have to shop. Don't have to give any more money to those multi-billionaires. You can support a local,
go to the UC Press and the little bookshops. Thank you, Scott, and all the best. Take care.
Okay, take care.
Ladies
Bye-bye.
and gentlemen, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. See you again in another episode of Conversations with MM. Bye for now.
Her feminist perspective, I think that's really where I get it.
You got it from her.
Social justice was so important to her, and it's become important to me.
We became very mindful of our environment and our planet. And we took baby steps. Of course, everything is about baby steps.
Yeah.
We just had to make our programs bigger and it could reach more people.
Toronto is so culturally diverse because there's so many Filipinos in Toronto. But what I don't like is higher education. There's not a lot of Filipinos. Even higher management, there's not a lot